For as long as car manufacturers have existed, there have been many ways to try and advertise their products into the mass population. Starts off from basic advertisement, call to action, to aiming for very specific target demographics from the many available ranges. Video games soon became part of available options, opening up car manufacturers to a new piece of media to cling on, to showcase their latest models to the younger generations and maybe make those kids tell their parents to buy the shiny cool car they saw in a video game. Now, I did do this kind of coverage almost 2 years ago, which mostly covered games that were fairly popular or well known enough to immediately spark some childhood nostalgia, but this time we're going through some of the more wacky, zany, and relatively unknown games, to the point of looking at region-locked games that have never been released out of their home countries. But let's start off with something fairly familiar. After the release of Test Drive Unlimited 2, there was a pretty big hole left behind by the franchise, but there was one title currently under development and to be released within the near future. Just a year later, in fact, 2012. But this time, the game is given to Slightly Mad Studios, who most people likely know for developing the Need for Speed Shift series and the Project Car series later. The game was developed shortly after the release of Shift 2 and would effectively carry over a lot of mechanics of that game, but both branded as a test drive and a Ferrari-focused game. This basically gave them a lot of leeway with development time, since most of the physics and handling was already there, so if you like the Shift games, this would be mostly similar to those in terms of feel. But since the game was made as a celebration of Ferrari's 65th year anniversary, there are liberties taken to the career mode, which actually turns this game into an interesting experience. There are over 50 car models available, and they're all scattered from the different eras of Ferrari, as the game's main campaign takes heavy inspiration from Porsche Unleashed, taking us through the golden era of Ferrari from 1947 to 1973, the silver era from 1974 to 1990, and the modern era from 1990 to 2011. From road cars to race cars, multiple disciplines from Formula 1 to GT racing, going through the eras of Ferrari does give a unique perspective, as we drive from the very first car developed with the 125S to cars like the 348 Spider, 575M Maranello, the FXX, and F1 cars like the Ferrari F2008, 150 Italia from the modern era. Since the game is effectively Shift 3 featuring Ferrari, every event will take place in closed circuits, 36 in total, featuring some real tracks like Spa, Monza, Silverstone, but there are also some fictional tracks like Misty Lock. These tracks are also designed with the different layouts based on the different years, which I think is really cool for that authentic historical experience. If you're a fan of Simcades and Ferrari, this game is actually a pretty great time. The only complaint I have is difficulty being a bit too easy. The opponents just fold way too easily on normal, so it's best to experience this on hard difficulty if you'd want a challenge. The other complaint is just how padded the campaign is, with so many different events in so many different eras. So if you're planning to finish everything, it's gonna take a while. Otherwise, this is a great way to substitute the experience of owning and driving some of your favorite Ferrari cars from the very beginning to the 2011 cars. At the very least, this game is nowhere near as bad as this one. I've covered a bunch of Ford racing games by Razorworks in the previous manufacturer video, but as it turns out, there are still a couple of Ford games by them that are still left to uncover. This time I went with Ford Street Racing, just for the weird ideas the name gave me. Expectation was that this would be a bit more underground type of experience, like maybe more customization and style all over, but turns out, not really. The thing that differentiates this game over its other siblings are the more simple things like progression and features, but also the amount of names this game seems to have. It's really weird since they're based on the region and consoles, starting with the Ford Bold Move Street Racing in the US and Canada, Ford Street Racing LA Duel in the EU, and Ford Street Racing XR Edition for Australia. There are some very noticeable differences for these versions. The most obvious is the difference for what car is available, as the Australian version swapped 3 standard cars with Australian Falcons instead. I don't know what the Bold Move is supposed to be, but that surely feels like some kind of exaggeration, because this game is actually pretty basic when it comes to the racing. The driving is simple. The AI are also pretty simple. And unfortunately, the tracks are also pretty simple. They're mostly situated in different sections of LA, taking away some of the more imaginative track designs from the other Ford racing games, or even the more interesting close tracks from Ford Racing 2. With your average road tracks around LA and their indestructible lampposts, you just lose a bit of speed and phase out for a short bit. Only some other decorations are destructible here for some reason, but I suppose it is just so they can keep the game as light as possible for the PSP port. But there is another gimmick in this game. Team racing is without a doubt the main showcase of the game. Just entering the menus will show the discrepancy between team racing and solo racing content. But how does team racing work here? Well, from the tutorials, the first thing they teach you is the ability to switch. We are given the ability to change whichever car to drive from the team. This can be done anytime by using the D-pad or the right stick. Commands can also be given to make them block any incoming opponent or to start a draft train. But the AI seems to be a bit shoddy here. Blocking doesn't work sometimes on corners and drafting can be a bit weird. But before we go to the full championships, we gotta get ourselves and our teammates something to drive first. In an attempt to balance this out, they've added an economy system and a showroom. We're only given 9,000 bucks, so it's either 2 Ford Escorts or 1 Escort and a Mustang GT, effectively starting us at the classic category first, despite the other cars from performance and high performance being available. There's also no performance tuning either. To be fair, the game does have some pretty neat damage models, so I do have to give it credit for that. From here on, it's just a matter of progressing through the championships to beat every single category and difficulty. It's quite simple, probably too simple. It doesn't help that the environments are not as interesting, but at least we get to unlock more tracks and cars. 18 in total with 2 from each category available by default. Alternatively, there's the challenges and team race that can also provide different things to do besides just racing while racking up some cash. This is a bit more interesting since it's either the basic time trial or some technical challenges being involved. Another alternative would be the solo racing for an even more basic experience. Also, if you hate grinding for money in this game, then this is also the better championship mode since there's no showroom, garage, or economy limitations. You can go jump to the performance and high performance class immediately here. Otherwise, the final alternative I can show is the quick race button for a completely randomized experience. Now, in case you've probably decided to get this game to play on the go, the PSP port has a bit more in store to discover. There's more tracks, more cars, and more team modes than the PS2, Xbox, or PC version, with the Australian version having the most, jumping from the normal 18 cars to 27 in total. So if you're interested in getting this game, then get the Australian PSP version. At least there would be more content to play around with that way. There was, however, another Ford racing game by Razorworks, coming out just 2 years after Ford Street Racing in 2008, simply titled as Ford Racing Off-Road, mainly featuring both Ford and Land Rover trucks and 4x4 cruisers, due to Ford's ownership of Land Rover at the time. From the very basics, it will feel similar to Ford Street Racing, the UI elements and driving physics being the biggest culprits, but they're mostly fine. It should be noted that the game features 2 types of progression, with the career and tournament mode. Differences comes from what is laid out on either option. Career is the basic progression mode. We're given a limited amount of cash at the start and have to win events to unlock more cars to purchase while also collecting money in the process. So initially, we're only allowed to purchase the Ford Ranger and Land Rover Defender. The remaining 14 cars will be unlocked throughout the career and subsequently be available to purchase or use in tournament and arcade mode. The interesting part of arcade is what's in store for the events. In Ford Street Racing, the championship races and challenges were split into 2 different categories, making the championship mode a bit too bland because of basic event repetition. This time, challenges are a part of the career progression, with a route system introduced letting players choose which event they prefer to progress. Regular race events are there and mandatory, unfortunately, but the special challenges will always fill in the multi-route selection in between. It really helps to stave off the boredom of just doing the same regular races over and over again. Plus, some of the game modes are pretty beneficial to learn more about the tracks. There's things like the elimination races, switching it up by eliminating 2 drivers every lap instead of 1 per lap. Checkpoint are based on a timer, a damage control mode requiring players to win while avoiding damage, which unfortunately has been nerfed here. Try slamming into the side of an opponent and the most you'll see is some dirt or the engine spewing smoke. A coin collector mode that really emphasizes exploring every path in the track. This thing is really good to learn of the track's layout, shortcuts, or just to figure out which path is the most efficient for racing. Unfortunately, not all tracks will have this challenge attached, as the later ones switch things up by introducing checkpoint races, point-to-point races, slalom courses, overtaking challenges, and so on. Being an off-road centric game, however, this game has the benefit to make some really outlandish track designs, at least compared to Ford Street Racing's tracks. While it's a bit of a mixed bag, at the very least we don't get too much of the same landscape thanks to the differences between the canyons, green hills, and snowy mountains, but they're also not that interesting to look at. A tad bit bland, especially after just a few races perhaps, but their layouts are where they really come ahead. Having multiple paths throughout the tracks really helps to spice things up, and the AI are no pushovers either. They will try to block you and even ram you out of the path. Then there's the usual issue of rubber band that can't really get out of hand in specific sections, something we'll have to deal with a lot in the tournament mode. Since that one has only regular race modes in it, but at least they instantly give out 100k worth of cash from the very start, letting us buy even the highest performance vehicle in the game, assuming it's already available to purchase from playing the career mode. Of course, there's the quick race option just like last time. It's the same as before, random track and random cars. While the game overall doesn't feel all that different from Ford Street Racing, the changes done to the event distribution does wonders to make the progression feel varied. Even without the team gimmicks, it just helps make things more interesting, and that's on top of the somewhat more imaginative track designs. It certainly came out a bit late to the scene though, especially since by 2008 there were games with a ton of Ford or Land Rover cars, but driving them on extremely bumpy off-road sections is a bit of a rarity. Just as rare as a game made out of Ladas, mostly about street racing and some ideas taken from many different sources of underground racing inspirations. Our story begins from Gelios Media over at Moscow, Russia, a development team with a knack for illegal street racing, while they also do work in the game development sector. Of course, this meant they were racing game developers, with their first title being Ostrich Runner, an arcade racer with some really garish and cartoony aesthetics. But upon witnessing the meteoric rise of street racing culture in video games, especially from the Need for Speed series at the time, the team were starting to have that itch to make their illegal street racing hobbies into something that they can channel directly into video game development. And mind you, these guys during the time only had 6 people working on the studio at the time, so this was a pretty monumental task to tackle. They managed to get a license with Avtovaz, a big Russian automotive company, to effectively lend them the Lada branding for the game. After a bit of development time and struggles with switching engines, the game would eventually release in the year 2006 exclusively for PC, and unfortunately only in Russian. Nowadays there's a fan-made English patch, translating most of the important bits like the menus, so non-Russian readers can at least understand the tasks and mechanics the game has to offer. On the surface, it's pretty clear just how large the Need for Speed inspirations are. Just look at the visual customization options and you'll see why. And most of the time, everything plays out like Underground 1 in a sense. You'll race in small preset races, but the overall map and track layout always takes place in an open world environment of Moscow, which you can actually explore anytime you'd like during races because there's no barrier limitations. The race type variety also goes from the very usual circuits, all the usual bells and whistles, a sprint race based on checkpoints similar to Midnight Club. This can come in ordered and unordered formats, although the ordered format is a bit scuffed since they don't show the other checkpoints until you reach the current one, and drag races without any of that lane system nonsense or any form of damage system to worry about heavy collisions. Each event will also reward cash in the form of rubles, and on top of that you can also bet away all of your cash if you want to get a significantly higher payout on top of the fixed cash rewards. There's 4 total classifications, but we'll start from the lowest with classics. This classification features some real old Ladas with 5 different models including a specific race-tuned 2101, the Samara class having 7 cars in total with a race-tuned 2108, the 110 class containing 5 cars and a race-tuned 2112, and at the top there's the Revolution class with only a single VAZ Revolution model. They represent the speed class as well, with the classic cars being the slowest to drive and only reaching around 100 to 130 kilometers an hour, while the Revolution class can go double that amount. Each car will of course have some extensive tuning options, whether it's the performance tuning or visual upgrades, some being a bit straightforward while others may be a bit confusing at the start thanks to the somewhat awkward UI design. However, the amount available is quite extensive, definitely not as much as the Need for Speed games, but for a very small team this is quite impressive. Even more so when we look at the interior customization, with options for the gear shifters, steering wheel, gauges, and even the pedals. Like, you're not gonna see it all the time, but they're certainly detailed enough to even include that apparently. Now for the racing itself, it's a bit of a mixed bag if I have to be honest. The approach of making the world very open is an interesting choice that really comes in clutch for the checkpoint based races, but there are some weird design choices that have to be mentioned. For one, nothing in the map can be damaged or destroyed. This leads to some awkward situations where a single stop sign can kill your momentum. Then there's the traffic, who on the surface looks fine. It is great to see them come out in such density as it makes the race feel dynamic and the city very populated, but they have issues too. Like, sometimes they'll switch lanes at normal speed, but then there's times where they'll just instantly switch at hyperspeed logic without a single care in the world. It doesn't matter if you or an opponent is next to them. This can also apply to when they decide to jump 2 lanes to the side. However, I did find something interesting during this. If you look back and forth, you can actually despawn the traffic cars. And as for the opponents, they're also a bit wishy-washy. They'll often struggle with routing spotting and can easily be confused by a certain direction, checkpoint, and traffic, making some races like the drag events be heavily dependent on RNG to stop the AI. But when nothing is there to confuse them, they are very competent. And then there's the police. These guys are somehow even more terrifying than any police force we've seen in any Need for Speed game. Jokes aside, they are hyper aggressive, will slam into you at full speed, have some of the most insane rubber banding known to man, and on top of that, they can outright refuse any logical limitations by driving past walls and obstacles, but they can also teleport to just perfectly hit you where it hurts. There's no reasonable way to stop them from spawning either, since you'll always rack up infractions while racing. Track layouts can really go into some interesting territory here, taking you out of the main open roads into smaller sections, requiring some good knowledge for finding a faster route that may be risky through sidewalks or alleyways. I've definitely had fun with this game. It's the most goofy and fun experience I've had from the current roster so far. But it has to be said, this game is a piece of shit. A fun piece of shit nonetheless. Plus, I can really appreciate the amount of features and details created for this game, especially knowing just how small the team was when they made this game. It's just a case of ambitions being way bigger than the amount of resources or skill available on hand. If you'd like to give this a try, then the game is currently available through the My Abandonware website, and the English patch can be acquired from ModDB, which I will link in the description down below. A long time ago, somewhere in the British Isles, the plans to create a licensed video game featuring noble cars were beginning to enter production. Developed by Brain in a Jar and published by Midas Interactive, a familiar name that has been involved with publishing many titles, including the EU release of some Chorokyu titles. Unfortunately, what would come out is quite underwhelming. So the game itself was only released for the EU in the year 2006. Or 2008, whichever one of these is correct. A bit confusing considering this game genuinely looks like a launch day PS2 title. It straight up looks like Burnout 1 with less details overall. But anyways, the game features single player and multiplayer, but for the single player content, we have the test drive option for some free practice. Track challenge letting us drive on any locked track with a set time to beat. Completion rewards the track to be used in every other game mode. Then we have the car challenge, which does a similar thing to the completion rewards, except it's for the cars. With a total of 12 tracks and 5 cars in total, this is really short, but maybe the club events can make it up. Well, actually no. The club event, as the game calls it, is effectively just the same as Test Drive, but now we're racing against 5 AI opponents. Both of these game modes require both track and car challenges to be finished first, to use anything beyond the Woods Centerway track and the M12. That's genuinely everything this game has to offer. There's no career mode, no campaign, no attempt to make it a bit more spicy with characters or some form of high stakes betting. Just some cars and tracks, unlock them one by one, and enjoy. Initially everything will feel like it's normal. That is until you approach a corner and start braking. I don't know why, but it seems braking while turning results in the car completely losing control. Like the car suddenly turns into a bar of soap. No matter which noble you pick, it'll be the same type of handling across all of them. Just super awkward driving and no proper enjoyment with these cars. And speaking of the cars, I feel like this is where the development team should have really come up with something creative to account for the lack of variety. There's only 5 different cars to choose from. Just having more tracks is not really an option either because, well, we can look at this game and how it ended up being. Whether it's for having some really unusual mechanics or features for a racing game, or having some of the most bonkers characters and a story to run alongside the career mode. But for what this game is, it's honestly really disappointing. Just the barest minimum, which doesn't really feel that good to race in.
Further camera.
I paid us a lot, mate. Final let. The way it showed, it way just flashed the text on screen.
I could make this in Unity.
I mean, I think almost any of us can make this even with no game development experience.
Okay, no. Keep in mind the brakes actually glow red, so that is detail. The people actually were passionate. I think the passion was just really fucking misguided.
Passion the passion was stuck on crack cocaine.
I wonder what made them want to have a racing game.
I think it has something to do with the fact that when TVR appeared in the first Gran Turismo, their sales went up by 400%. So that's probably why Noble has its own game.
No.
No. It literally said that. Quit. No. You are not quitting, bitch boy.
Quit?
Did you know there was a point in time where Porsche was exclusively contracted with Sony? Or to be specific, the Boxster model was around the year 1995 to 1997, covering the development time of this game. That time was given so the people at Sony can truly get the most accurate model of the Boxster's appearance and performance. Which is kinda weird knowing this game is titled as Porsche Challenge, yet it only features this model. We're mainly given an option between 6 different drivers, each with their own personalized Boxster based on their color scheme and license plate. Their personalities are also quite different, but there's not really that many ways to listen to their voice lines or pay attention to the animations. Everything else will be similar, so there's no need to worry about performance differences. The main career mode revolves around racing through 12 events, being split into 3 to accommodate the 4 tracks and their different setups. Before we start, there's also the option to switch between arcade or simulation handling, but if I was honest, the difference is very hard to notice. Maybe there's a bit of a subtle oversteer with the arcade handling, but both will still require some good braking for the win. In terms of difficulty, while easy is... well, easy. Normal can be a bit hard, but it really depends on how well you drive. And evil is when the Porsche management demands perfection out of you. Even more so when the game requires only first place finishes to progress, and there's a limited amount of retries for the championship mode. The overall gameplay has a lot of similarities to other arcade racers like Ridge Racer. There's a time limit between checkpoints, opponents start early to line up the positions, and you got 3 laps to pass all of them. There are some quirks in this game though. See this guy. Be wary of them. They will be given some monumental rubber band just to make sure they're always in butt sniffing range, and they'll do anything to get that position. This is pretty cheap if I have to be honest, but it's primarily done to keep you on your toes even once you get first place. Any lapse of judgment could result in a snatched victory. After 4 races we get to finally save some progress, and the track layout changes into the long layout where barriers and shortcuts get introduced into the track. After 4 of the long layout, we then get the interactive layout, which mostly randomizes the track for some chaos. There's no economy or upgrades here, so performance remains similar throughout the entire game, making this game mostly a player's skill check. Success is being determined mostly by corner mastery, either with the regular brake or handbrake. But if you need the place to practice without wasting retries, then there's the practice mode and time trial right under the championship mode. You can select the tracks here for convenience. Additionally, there's a bit of behind the scenes footage for the design of the Boxster in the extras. The team definitely did a great job in modeling the Boxster, especially with the limitation of the PS1. And overall, the game is a pretty good arcade experience. If you're a fan of Porsche or the Boxster model, this could be a recommendation for some quick sessions. Even if this game didn't manage to entice you into getting a Porsche Boxster, it did have some long-lasting legacy for the development team, however, as they became a separate entity from Sony, adopting the name Team Soho, which would later use the driving mechanics from this game as the basis for the Getaway game series. Let's take a break from the Western cars and start covering something from the East, with our next game being this. From what I can gather, this was apparently an Xbox 360 live arcade game that was released for free in 2007 and was available for around a year before it eventually would be removed. It was developed by Castaway Entertainment, which was formed by former Blizzard employees and would regrettably suspend operations less than a year after this game was released. And I think it's kinda obvious why. For starters, the game is only titled Yaris, and that's because the game is effectively or supposedly an advertisement for the Toyota Yaris cars. All 3 models of the Yaris to be specific. We can choose between the 3-door hatchback, the 4-door sedan, and a 4-door S model sedan. Customization is mainly just colors and wheels, but then there's also these options. Why do we have this? Because this game is a futuristic combat racing game apparently, featuring Yarises with a robotic gun that pops out of the hood like a tentacle. If I were to be honest, these are the kind of things I would expect some random small Japanese studio to come up with, not former veterans from Blizzard. The gameplay for the most part will be racing through a series of U-shaped tubes of several different layouts and length, while also picking up coins, with the very weird handling that feels more like we're just sliding side to side instead of actually driving. Battling against several weird looking enemies that really seem like random assets thrown into the game, from a toaster on wheels to sumo wrestlers, mainly just for variety and quantity I imagine, as we destroy them with the tentacle gun, dropping coins in the process. The type of weaponry to expect are along the lines of a saw blade, Gatling laser, rocket launcher, shotgun laser, all the while these techs pop in, making things look even more cursed as it goes on. Besides unlocking the other 2 cars, coins also help with upgrading the car's chassis and wheels for what I'm guessing are better defenses. And yeah, that's pretty much the loop.
Giant Oster.
Subwoofy.
What the fuck is that? Abi a spider. Saucer. Helicopter.
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 In 2009, a group of Swedish developers would end up working with one of the biggest brands of Swedish automotive. Being experienced sim racing developers, the result is pretty impressive despite the lack of content available. But that's easily explained away as the game is effectively an advertisement for Volvo and their car models at the time, with some intense details, all for completely free of charge. There's 3 game modes available from the start with quick race, time trial, and competition, but the last one actually requires you to have an account for some competitive multiplayer sessions. The remaining pieces of content are the cars and tracks, of which there are 6 Volvo cars available. The concept race spec, S40, 850, 240, C30, and the old S60. We can also set up liveries and drivers to use in the races. For tracks, there's only 2 options between the Gothenburg Eco Drive Arena and Autodrom Chaika. Several options to tinker with the race event to alter some specific settings like the lap count, opponents, and several others. But this is one of those games where most of the development time goes into the gameplay, and it will prove that directly, with this being one of the smoothest experiences I've had with a Simcade racer so far. It perfectly hit that sweet spot for being sim enough to still require some skill, but also arcadey enough to have the cars not constantly understeer at every turn. And while there are occasions when the car can go into a slide, it's not uncontrollable either, with some skillful attempt at fixing the trajectory. While that is the only thing available for gameplay, there are other bits I'd like to talk about with this game. For one, it had a ton of advertisements inside the game. Every loading screen will be covered by Volvo advertisement, showing cars that are not even available in the game, but there are other companies involved as well, including Pirelli, which just so happened to sponsor the game's development. They even did a full competition during the game's launch where the winner gets a set of Pirelli tires. But overall, this is an extremely solid and simple Simcade experience with a problem of having way too little content. But as a free game, that kind of feels alright. It really feels like a demo showcase for what an actual Volvo car could do, especially in a race setup, and I definitely feel this game succeeded in what it's intended to do, both as an advertisement material or a solid driving experience. Say, do you like Transformers? Do you like it when they turn into some nice and recognizable cars? Cars like the Camaro, Audi R8, Pontiac Solstice, and the Citroen C4. Okay, maybe this one isn't directly a creation of Michael Bay, Takara Tomy, or Hasbro, but the Citroen is built by something stronger, pure Turkish determination. That's the thing here. Despite Citroen being a French car manufacturer, the game is only available in Turkish. I'm not entirely sure about the history of this game specifically, but judging by the content, this seems to be a free game made to advertise the C4 model back in 2008. But what is even the deal with its Transformer-esque robot form? Well, I suppose it was simply the attempt to ride the wave of popularity from the first Michael Bay movie from the year prior, with the idea of transforming automobiles being at the height of its popularity. It's not exactly a bad idea to try and take advantage of. A fair warning though, the game is very short on content, only having 1 track around the roads of Istanbul, and of course, 1 drivable car-robot hybrid of the C4 variant. We can't really change anything besides the colors, and there's only a time trial mode available. On the more basic stuff, we just drive around and collect pickups to fill the boost gauge, mostly driving with a bit of Simcade physics. But then we can also transform into the robot form with the press of a button. As a robot, we don't really get to use the boost mechanic, but with the mighty power of limbs, the robot form can take advantage of the environment to do some sick tricks, grind rails, or bypass barriers to get the advantage. Some of these mechanics are a bit obscure while others get highlighted by the arrow, so it is best to try and experiment with the robot form. So it is possible to play as either a car or the robot for an entire session, but it is best to try and mix both for the fastest lap around town. Either way, there isn't really that much left to do, which I guess for a free game seemingly developed by only 10 people, this is an alright showcase of the car, if not a bit lacking. The car details seem to be pretty good from the interior view. The robot form, while goofy, does add some depth into the gameplay, and honestly, if every Citroen C4 actually can transform like this, then people would have flocked to get the car. A missed opportunity from Citroen. Could have had a banger sale. On the faster side, there's another Lamborghini-based title. The game was developed for the N64 by Titus France, who also happened to publish the game, but there was also a Japan-only version with several improvements by Taito, titled Super Speed Race 64. But why did they drop the Lamborghini name? Well, you'll see why in a bit. The game starts off with simple options between 1 to 4 players, and once you're in, it's a choice between arcade, time trial, single race, and championship. Both arcade and championship will be the event to unlock the remaining vehicles, while single races and time trial remain as the extra options. By default, our starter cars are the Lamborghini Diablo and Countach, each with 3 different paint jobs and livery setups, with no visible indicator of any stat points to notice. So it's safe to assume every car will perform similarly, which makes a lot of sense once we get to the gameplay. At its core, everything in this game is quite arcadey. It feels like a mix of either Ridge Racer and the early Need for Speed titles. Every car is grippy and fast. You can turn even faster by letting go of the accelerator or by tapping brake during turns, while the AI has these predetermined points where they will perform well or horribly. This can be altered in the settings though if you'd like more of a challenge to either turn on things like rubber band or if you'd like to increase the intensity to expert difficulty. In arcade mode, the main challenge will lean more towards the timer than the opponents. It's pretty tight, and in the later tracks it gets super tight at the final laps. You need some perfect understanding of the game's physics to really push it. But hang on, have you noticed it? There's actually other brands in the game, and it's not just one. So despite the naming, this game doesn't exclusively feature Lamborghinis, only that we start with them. The other cars in this game are the Ferrari F50, Testarossa, McLaren F1, Porsche 959, Dodge Viper, and Bugatti EB110. The game is pretty slick too. They'll try and fill in most of the opponent's slots with the other Lamborghini paint jobs, but there will usually be around 2 opponents using non-Lamborghini cars that you can spot. Once you've beaten the arcade mode, one of these non-Lamborghini cars will be unlocked, with the remaining 5 from either more arcades or the championship mode. The latter option is done in a weird way in this game. You can change the settings for each track roster, like enabling or disabling pit stops, alter the maximum lap count, or even activate reverse layouts once it's unlocked. On default, pit stops will be enabled on top of 6 laps, turning the races into more of a mini endurance event. There's no counter for this, but every now and then our spotter will start screaming about tire wear. The most this will do is make the car spin out more easily in hard turns. This lowers our top speed, so we do need to deal with the pit stop and their annoying mini games. On paper, a mini game for pit stop is interesting since it keeps things interactive, but this one is a bit of a mixed bag. The fueling section is an analog flicking mini game, which gets really annoying since you need to be accurate with the flicking speed, and then tires just require a simple analog spin. If only the flicking is more lenient, this would have been a pretty good mechanic, but as it is, it's arguably better off to just take the risk for like half a lap with no fuel than to deal with this. From this point, it's mainly just repetition until all cars are unlocked. It's fine for an arcadey mid-90s game. They certainly could be a bit better in some aspects, but there's somewhat enough depth with the pit stop mechanics and some tracks having multiple routes that are not outright better to take. It's really up to you to make the race easier or have it be harder from bad strategy calls with the pit stop or by taking routes you can't handle. Originally, this section was going to cover another Ferrari game with Ferrari Trofeo Pirelli, but after closer inspection, the game was pretty much the same as the one I've covered before, titled Ferrari The Race Experience. In fact, it was the prequel to The Race Experience with the same development team and publisher, so most of its content ended up being mostly similar. So instead, I've decided to pivot away to covering this Ferrari game instead. This one being developed by Sega's arcade division and was made for the arcade machines back in the 90s or early 2000s. As for the reason why Sega seems to keep making games with Ferrari in them, well, they were a pretty big name in the car scene, and apparently Yu Suzuki, yes, that Yu Suzuki, is a big fan of Ferrari himself. He even owns this Ferrari that was used to be implemented into this game, which he's also the director for back when he was part of the Sega arcade division. The game was released on arcades initially, but then received some console ports for the Dreamcast and PS2. Outside of some slight technical differences, both versions will play similarly to one another. The Dreamcast version is missing some content, but the core of the gameplay is mostly similar. There's the arcade, championship, and single races, each with their obvious differences, with arcade being the classic experience of racing against the opponents and time, championship which puts us on a back-to-back races without any time limit, and single races being the most simple. The console versions also get an extra benefit from having extra tracks to drive on top of the arcade ones, like Motegi's Oval Circuit, Short and Long Suzuka, 1998 Monza, Sugo, Long Beach, and the console exclusives of Atlanta, Nürburgring, Nürburgring, Laguna Seca, Sepang, and Fiorano. All these circuits can be unlocked by either finishing in certain positions in a certain race or championship, driving over a certain distance in the game, or by entering a password. The only drivable cars here are the Ferrari F355. Instead of having currencies to upgrade, the performance are mainly dictated by tuning and toggling the different supports. So I suppose even in the console version, the game is abundantly loyal to the original arcade version. Even the cosmetics here are mainly colors and driver numbers with the liveries attached to them. This does make it so that the only thing separating you and total victory is pure skill, especially since the game, despite being designed as an arcade racer, has the physics of a simcade. Hummer has been a bit of a stinker when it comes to racing games. Their best performance was arguably in the test drive off-road games, but when it comes to exclusive manufacturer titles, something always goes wrong in one way or another. This game is probably more of that. 4x4 Hummer, an off-road game developed by a Russian developer named Avalon Style Entertainment. And looking at the gameplay, this is shaping up to be yet another lethal experience. Once we begin, there's going to be 13 regions from all over the world, each having a pseudo open world section and a varying amount of events to deal with. There's only a few unlocked initially, with the rest locked behind from progression or points earned. Despite the name, this game actually features 15 cars total from brands like Hummer, Cadillac, Chevrolet, GMC, and a Saab for some reason, each with their own stats and performance, with some upgrades for visuals and performance available. At first though, only 3 are unlocked, with the rest being locked behind points that we'll have to earn from the available events. This is where the game falls apart kinda. The physics is quite the low budget experience that is expected. The cars are completely glued to the floor with near impossible methods of gaining any airtime, and the acceleration forwards or reverse can feel really sudden, like you're going from 0 to 100 in less than a second. It's kinda weird since some of the terrain effects are actually pretty good. Going past muddy dirt paths will cause the car to actually slow down. Going down a bumpy path will also have the cars react somewhat properly. Most of them are legitimately more focused towards off-road style of customization, and the damage model of the game does deserve some commendations. The events overall will have things like the usual sprint races, circuits, time trial checkpoints, and checkpoint-based races. They'll cover some regular terrains, mixes of the average bumpy hills, muddy swamps, and steep mountains. Depending on how we perform during the race, we'll get the points required for unlocking more cars and events, with a sizable bonus and payout based on our finishing position. If anything, this game has some interesting ideas, especially for an off-road racer. It's not just simply about driving in the wilderness, and will try to put you into places that are not usually driven for races. It is a bit lethal though, especially in the core physics bits. The naming scheme is also pretty scummy since it's not just about Hummers. There's even more Chevrolet cars in this game than Hummers, and the game may or may not contain malware if you happen to grab the game from archive.org. So keep that in mind as a warning if you're somehow interested in the game. We're not done with the off-road action just yet, but I promise this will be the last one. Developed by GameSauce over from Great Britannia, and featuring only Jeeps. There's 18 Jeep models to drive in, although the majority are logged behind some progression first. Unfortunately, the game only opens up group race mode before anything else besides custom race, that is. But group race on its own is basically a single race mode with 5 tracks total on each group to win. It does fluctuate around 5 tracks, so it's not always the same amount. Sometimes you'll get cars from specific races, sometimes it'll require a full group completion first. Either way, the gameplay is quite hectic. By default, we have a nitro system to use throughout the race, but so does the opponent. There's no visuals for it for some reason, although you can definitely hear the sound effect clearly enough. This is technically how they're implementing Rubber Bandit to the game. Since nitros passively refills anyways, it is beneficial to keep using them from time to time. There are some really bizarre things about the handling. The car will always slide on higher speeds, so you're incentivized to slow down during corners, except this understeering problem can be exploited. Before anyone says it's authentic off-road handling, this also applies to the regular road tarmac. Because of how the road corners are designed here, it's always beneficial to intentionally wallbang to instantly direct the car to where we're supposed to go. You might lose some speed, but it's better than slowing down a lot just to pass some simple corners. On the positive side, these tracks are designed in ways that can really spice up the races, like having a ton of multiple routes to pass through or take advantage of. The game is even nice enough to let you take advantage advantage of the off-roads, which really comes in handy if you botch the jump. There's 15 tracks, but if we're counting things like reverse variants, then the total jumps to 30 instead, which makes things a bit interesting since some paths are more one-sided for the regular setup, so you gotta find alternatives. Once we at least beat the first group races, the tournament mode is unlocked. There's 9 in total and they're a bit longer than the usual group races. There's more laps and you gotta do each race back to back. It'll take a while and have a ton of repetition with repeat tracks, but it is what it is. It's a somewhat decent arcadey game about Jeeps, and at least this time it's actually just Jeeps. This one is a weird case. So SCS Software, the developers of Euro Truck Simulator, decided before making ETS2, they would dabble into some manufacturer-sponsored content. It was mentioned that by working with an established truck manufacturer, the studio hoped there would be more companies open for collaborations in the future. The game was released in 2012 and published by either CD Projekt Red or Excalibur Publishing depending on the region. If you've played either Euro Truck Sim or American Truck Sim, then you pretty much already know the majority of the content and gameplay. You drive big Scania branded trucks, specifically the R-Series Scania trucks, do some jobs and complete objectives to reach the very top with level 55 through the different game modes. The first one being a driving license, tasking the player to park the truck in the designated area with its own twist, like having multiple parking spots that will have to be filled in a specific order, sometimes requiring a trailer to be attached to the truck. This license test also has some point system shenanigans, like challenging the player to not use any exterior camera while avoiding every form of collision possible. Next one is the driver competition mode, giving the truck a makeover with a livery inspired by the Young European Truck Driver competition, while challenging players with multiple gauntlets. For something a bit more extreme, there's the Dangerous Drives mode, in an effort to prepare everyone for some extreme conditions through realistic settings, from extreme weather or specifically placed traffic or obstacles. Also a very familiar scoring system to the license tests. Freeform driving up next. This is the most familiar game mode from ETS or ATS. You basically do delivery jobs. And finally, the reaction test, which is like another form of license test, except it's mainly about testing your reflexes on the brakes. There's not really that much for the reaction tests, so everything else will have to really pick up the slack for this game. But I think the biggest obstacle for the game as of now is the existence of ETS2 and ATS. As much as I see this as a very solid manufactured driving game, especially for a truck simulator, there doesn't seem to be much of a reason why you'd pick this over ETS2 or ATS. Those games have racked up a ton of community support since they've released, and have a ton of mod support to really enhance the immersion. A bit of a change from the cars would be welcome here. Luckily, I managed to find this, Ducati World Racing Challenge, a game developed by Attention to Detail. Yes, that is the studio name, and it was published by Acclaim. The game is basically a piece featuring some historical machines from Ducati's vaults, with some interesting progression setup, being mostly reminiscent of the PS1 Gran Turismo titles. The first being the Ducati Life mode, featuring a ton of features more commonly seen from the Gran Turismo modes, things like a dealership, race classifications, tuning shops, and a license test. These challenges are split into 4 different license types from basic 1 to advanced. There's not much, but the majority of these tests will come in handy to get the driving mechanics in sync, with mechanics like front and rear braking being separate alongside the weird steering slider that you can find in the settings option. They also grant cash rewards on top, but because there's no gold, silver, or bronze qualifications, it is a pretty mild boost over the starting cash, and you'll see why soon. We start off with 10,000 cash on hand, which will only be enough to either go for the 50s bikes if lucky or the monster classification. The dealership will also highlight a bit of a problem with the UI structure of the game, since they don't really get classified in a reasonable manner. If I show you this page of the bikes option, you'll probably think the dealership is the only place to buy the bikes, but that would be wrong. Everything but the dealership will instead run on a fixed store setting, while the dealership shuffles bikes with randomized cost. The Ducati magazines and classified options feature stronger bikes at higher price, but the stores function like a regular dealership. Every bike can be upgraded with the usual stuff, more powerful engines, better handling, or lighter chassis. There's also the optional cosmetics for the rider, but the prices are quite the scam. It's not even clear if these will increase any aerodynamics or whatever, so it might be best to outright ignore their existence for a while. The physics and handling of the game is overall a pretty good attempt at making a sim-like experience on the topic of bike racing. A bit of holes here and there with some awkward physics interaction, like how the bike seems to react badly with any airtime or any slight bump towards the wall, often resulting in a crash. And this also happens regularly to the AI, like at least twice every lap. turning every race situation into a survival situation more than actual racing. As long as you can avoid crashing, it is guaranteed you will be faster than the AI. Alternatively, if you're sick of the constant need to grind for money in Ducati life, then there's the quick race mode, with basic progression of just beating each race in different categories, and modes between single races or time trial to then unlock more tracks and bikes, of which there are 9 tracks available and 40 bikes in total, from as far back as the 50s to the early 2000s Ducati bikes. The game is certainly flawed, but if anything, it's actually kind of impressive with the fact that they are capable of making a Gran Turismo-esque racing game exclusively built off Ducati bikes, even with all the janks attached. Like maybe if there was a better thought out economy for the cosmetics and some of the competition prizes, Ducati Life could have easily been as good as Gran Turismo and stood as the bike adjacent before Tourist Trophy even came into the picture. But now, for one last time, let's visit the East Coast once more. Toyota Netz Racing is a rare Japanese exclusive racing game for the original PlayStation, released in 1999. Developed and published by Atlus, it was uniquely distributed through Toyota dealerships as a part of a marketing campaign for the Toyota Netz brand. The goal: promote the newly launched Netz brand, a youth-oriented sub-network of Toyota showrooms. And what better way to reach young drivers than through their PlayStations? They even only gave the game away through the Netz dealerships around Japan at the time, which really increased the rarity of physical copies of these games. So no English is available, but only a few texts are in Japanese anyway, so it's not a problem. On paper, this looks like your average sim-like experience from the PS1, built from the ground up, but not quite. Toyota Netz is actually a sort of conversion or standalone expansion to another racing game titled as Advan Racing. The game features a lineup of Toyota vehicles, from compact hatchbacks to sporty coupes, all rendered in charming low-poly style. At the start, the choices are between 8 of them, featuring the Chaser, Aristo, Trueno, 2 MR2 models, and several Altezas to pick. It's actually pretty specific since these cars are sold through the Netz dealerships. There's no economy feature too, so it's just pick whichever car you'd want to drive for the spot race. The single races with several options of tracks between Fuji Speedway, a full or short version of Suzuka, and the Oval Speedway, tuned with the settings to choose whichever time of day the race should take place in, the weather condition, lap counts, and opponent numbers, going up to 15 opponents racing on the track. Netz Race is the Grand Prix setup, taking us through each track with their default configurations. These can't feel like they're endless since they'll add more races than the available tracks by using different configurations of daytime and weather effects, while the handling here leans more towards being arcadey. There's not much to offer beyond these modes, but that's because this game is effectively Advan Racing with significantly less features. Only the quick race menus were adopted into Toyota Netz, and for what it is, this genuinely feels like a demo to the actual game. There's also a very neat feature in the information page featuring some promotional videos for the Aristo, Chaser, Altezza, and Vitscast, showcasing its engine specs, looks, and performance IRL. The Vits was likely not added into the game because it was the slowest out of the bunch. Interestingly, there's actually a second game based on Advan Racing, which also focuses on Toyotas, called The Real Racing Toyota, released as a part of the Simple 1500 series, which may muddy up search results when looking for it online, including more Toyota cars beyond the Netz dealership network, with some Supras, Celicas, and the Corona Exif or Corolla Levin. Some of the tracks from Advan Racing that were cut out of Toyota Netz have also been added back in, such as Tokachi International Speedway, Sendai Highland Raceway, Sportsland Sugo, Twinnig Motegi, and Mine Circuit. But otherwise, everything else is pretty much the same. The lack of a GT mode that was available in Advan Racing is probably going to confuse people as to why there's even a fuel or tire gauge for these games, since most of these races in their default configurations aren't really long enough to really utilize the pit stop feature. The only way to achieve that in either Toyota Netz or the Real Racing Toyota is by using custom configurations to turn every single race into endurance events. Thanks to the lack of any unlocks or economy system, this does turn both games into a very simple and chill experience. The kind of game you pick up whenever you just want to drive in some Toyotas of the late 90s for leisurely experiences. We've covered some more games that are somewhat relatively unknown this time around, going down to learning some mild Turkish just to understand menu navigation. This was certainly a weird era for racing games, when manufacturers would rather have their own brand or model specific games, to the point of taking risks by giving them away for free in the hopes of increasing awareness to the masses. But there were definitely some that gave it their all thanks to the passionate developers that either fully believe in the project or are just that good and inspired to make the best product they can make. Nowadays, manufacturers are more than happy to just let bigger budget games do contracts for their brand to be attached, and most indie to AA games are more open to just make fairly accurate replicas of the real thing. But if JDM is to be taken as a sign, it seems most manufacturers are more open to just supporting some of these lower budget games, so it seems the era of manufacturer exclusive games is completely gone. Even if that's the case, there's definitely still some place for a lot of these old games, as many of them are quite iterative with existing mechanics and may or may not end up being the inspiration for some future titles after them. But anyways, how about you? Have any of these weird, obscure, and goofy games made you want to own any of these brands? Comment down below, and why not mention if there's even more obscure manufacturer racing games that I still missed. Maybe you'll see another video in another year or two. And with that, I'll see you next time.